Israeli occupation vehicles target Kamal Adwan Hospital in northern Gaza, causing a fire inside its intensive care unit. Egypt's El-Sisi and Indonesia's Widodo discuss developments in Gaza, Syria, and Lebanon. And Prime Minister Netanyahu says Israeli forces will stay in a buffer zone on the Syrian border. It's 4 p.m. Cairo local time, and you're now watching Q News. We begin today's bulletin with the latest developments in Gaza. Occupation vehicles have targeted Kamal Adwan Hospital in northern Gaza, causing a fire inside its intensive care unit. The hospital's director said that Israeli occupation forces targeted nearby homes before attacking the hospital with gunfire and shelling. The intensive care unit, which is the only one in northern Gaza, was deliberately targeted, causing a fire that forced the evacuation of ventilator-dependent patients. It's now out of service, and the hospital is facing a severe water shortage. The World Health Organization says an international medical team urgently needed at Kamal Adwan Hospital has been blocked from deploying due to Israel's siege in northern Gaza. World Health Organization's regional director for the Eastern Mediterranean also condemned the repeated attacks on the medical facility. She wrote on X, "The fear endured by the hospital staff and patients in recent days is indescribable and unacceptable," adding that the hospital is without surgical or maternal care capacity. Several Palestinians have been killed and many were injured in the occupation's bombing of various areas across the Gaza Strip. Palestinian media reported that the occupation forces targeted a tent housing displaced people in the city of Deir el-Balah, as well as another in Jabalia. They also targeted a park in Nusayrat camp in central Gaza. An Israeli fighter jet has targeted a house in Beit Hanun, killing 4 Palestinians and injuring several others. Palestinian media reported that the fighter jet also fired towards areas of the Zaytun neighborhood in Gaza City and towards El Jnaina neighborhood east of Palestinian city of Rafah. Three Palestinians have been killed and others were injured in an Israeli airstrike that targeted a house in Khan Yunis in southern Gaza, where Israeli occupation forces have been committing genocide for over 14 months. In addition, the occupation army has issued evacuation orders to several blocks in Al Breish camp in central Gaza. Gaza-based health authorities have confirmed that the Palestinian death toll from the Israeli onslaught since October 7th has risen to over 45,000, with over 107,000 injuries. They added that the Israeli occupation forces committed 3 massacres against families in Gaza over the past 24 hours, killing at least 38 Palestinians and injuring 203 others. Israeli occupation forces have detained at least 15 Palestinians from various areas of the West Bank since yesterday evening. Palestinian media reported that among the detainees was a woman from Gaza who was in the West Bank for treatment and a child. The raids were accompanied by assaults and threats against detainees and their families, along with the widespread destruction of property and homes. Egypt, US, and Qatar have made intensive efforts in recent days to advance ceasefire talks before President Joe Biden leaves office next month. Sources told Reuters a ceasefire deal could be days away. Hamas said a deal could be reached if Israel stops setting new conditions. A Palestinian official close to the talks described the negotiations as serious, with every word being discussed. Previous rounds of talks over the past year have failed, with Israel insisting on maintaining a military presence in Gaza, while Hamas demands the withdrawal of troops before releasing hostages. For more analysis, we now move to Salma Al-Fiqi in our newsroom.
Thank you, Salma. And for further analysis on the current situation in Gaza, we're joined from Ramallah by Murad Harfoush, political analyst and expert on Israeli affairs. Welcome to Qnews, Mr. Harfoush. Let me start off by asking you, what are the key elements of Hamas's statement regarding the Gaza ceasefire, and why does the U.S. view the potential for such a ceasefire as being near? Can you hear me, Mr. Harfoush?
Everybody? Yes. In my opinion, the ongoing negotiations and the indicators there to attest to the approaching of a deal, specifically in light of the propositions and the discords that have arisen in the previous negotiation sessions without reaching a deal. In fact, right now, all the indicators attest to the fact that a ceasefire deal is looming in the horizon. And right now we see in the US media that a ceasefire deal is actually approaching, but definitely more negotiations need to be carried out. And, we as well have an issue regarding the Israeli hostages that are going to be released in the first phase. The Israeli occupation forces considers them humanitarian cases, and so they are rushing their release, as well as the release of the Palestinians in Israeli prisons.
Mr. Harfoush, how can we see, in the light of Hamas's demands for guarantees, what does Israel's insistence on removing senior Palestinian prisoners reveal about the broader strategic objectives in Gaza and the West Bank, do you think?
Undoubtedly, Hamas wants international guarantees in order to operationalize the agreement. You know, all the previous agreements were violated by Israel. And we have seen Israel over and over again expanding the war. And so it is only rational for Hamas to request some international guarantees to the enactment of this agreement. As well, Hamas has apprehensions regarding the interim operationalization of this agreement from the end of Israel, and that the enactment of it might not really be sustainable. And so Israel, as we all know, keeps on manipulating the rhetoric and the terms and the items of the agreement provisions. And we have seen Israel do that over and over again in previous instruments. They do that just as a circumvention, and because they want to perpetuate their existence on Palestinian lands and in the different governorates of Palestine, and specifically in the Gaza Strip. They don't want to withdraw from Gaza Strip or from the Philadelphia corridor or axis, and because, you know, these are some pending problematic areas that Israel wants to maintain control over. And for that matter, we find Israel turning around and circumventing
Mr. Harfoush,
can
I also ask you, when the Israeli Defense Minister Katz had stated that Israel would control Gaza like the West Bank, what underlying political or military strategies do you think could this statement be reflecting, and how might it shape the future of the Israeli policies in Gaza?
The Minister of Defense of Israel, in fact, wants to perpetuate the Israeli presence in Gaza. He doesn't want to withdraw his forces. He wants to maintain presence, as we said, and when the need arises for entering into additional areas of Palestine, they want to guarantee that they have access to these areas, just as what's happening in the West Bank. You know, the Israelis are actually tracking and trying to arrest the Palestinian activists in the West Bank, and they want to impose full control over a lot of areas in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank as well. And by that, Israel is violating all kinds of instruments and agreements. And in fact, the Liberation Organization, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, wants to fight back these Israeli practices in order to deter the Israelis from perpetuating presence in the Palestinian lands. In fact, Israel has partially wants to partially withdraw from the Gaza Strip, but doesn't want to withdraw from all Palestinian territories. And on top of that, they want to perpetuate the barricade and the siege on the Gaza Strip, and the Israelis do not want at all to provide any guarantees that they are going to withdraw from all Palestinian territories. And for that matter, the Palestinian Authority wants the international community to mobilize some guarantees in order to
and that was from Ramallah. That was Mr. Murad Harfoush, a political analyst and expert on the Israeli affairs. Thank you so much, Mr. Harfoush, for your insights and for being with us today. And we're back to you again, Salma.
Thank you so much, Salma, for conducting this interview. The Israeli occupation military has issued forced evacuation orders to several neighborhoods in central Gaza's Brage refugee camp. Israeli army spokesman published a map of the zones that must be cleared. According to local and international organizations, there are no safe zones in the Gaza Strip. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has taken the stand in his long-running corruption trial for the second time this week. Netanyahu arrived with his lawyer after he was ordered to testify 3 times a week regarding a 2019 indictment in 3 cases involving gifts from millionaire friends and his alleged seeking of regulatory favors for media tycoons in return for favorable news coverage. He has denied any wrongdoing and has pleaded not guilty. The spokesman for the Secretary General of the United Nations, Stefan Dujarric, says that Israel continues to reject efforts to deliver aid to northern Gaza. In press statements, Dujarric said that the Israeli occupation authorities rejected 3 UN-led humanitarian aid missions, bringing food and water to parts of the besieged northern Gaza yesterday. He added that the United Nations has tried to reach the besieged areas 40 times since the beginning of December, 38 of which were rejected and 2 were prevented.
Escalate violence on all fronts throughout the country. The Secretary General
U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan has stressed the need for a political solution to the Israel-Hamas conflict. Speaking at a New York City event, Sullivan noted that the U.S. government has never been satisfied with its efforts and always wants to be pushing for more in war zones like Gaza. Sullivan warned that without a political solution, Gaza's population could become radicalized, leaving nothing to work with going forward.
Solution, a political track alongside the military track, and that starts with the basic.
Displaced Palestinians in Gaza's Qnews have flocked to 8 trucks in El Mawasi. Crowds scramble to secure bags of flour, a resource now scarce and unaffordable. The winter cold has compounded the misery of displaced Palestinians in the war-torn Gaza Strip, where they face shortages of supplies and the threat of starvation. The World Bank Group has stated that since October 7, 2023, the financial system in Gaza and the West Bank has faced severe disruptions and damages. The World Bank and United Nations Interim Damage Assessment, updated to July 2024 figures, estimates $14.2 million in damages to the financial sector in Gaza between October and the end of January 2024. This includes the damage or destruction of 93% of bank branches in Gaza, as well as 88% of microfinance institutions, most money changers, and 88% of insurance companies. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi and President of Indonesia Joko Widodo have discussed developments in Gaza, Syria, and Lebanon, reaffirming the importance of continuing efforts to achieve a ceasefire in Gaza. The 2 leaders emphasized the necessity of respecting the rights of the Palestinian people to establish their independent state in accordance with international legal resolutions. They also expressed the importance of restoring stability to both Syria and Lebanon, stressing the need to respect their sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity. Moving to Lebanon, the Israeli military has blown up and demolished several residential buildings in southern Lebanon as its forces continue to occupy border villages. According to Lebanon's state-run national news agency, explosions were heard in Tyre, Harfa, El Jabayin, and Chihni. The Israeli military also targeted buildings in the town of Nakura for the 3rd consecutive day. The Israeli occupation army has acknowledged that a settler group entered southern Lebanon earlier this month. Israeli media, citing the military, confirmed that civilians crossed the blue line into Lebanon and were dispersed by troops. The military stated that breach hinders operations in the area and called it a serious incident, but that is under investigation. Now moving to Syria, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said that Israeli forces will stay in a buffer zone on the Syrian border until another arrangement is in place that ensures Israel's security. Israel pledged to double its population on the occupied Golan Heights and said threats from Syria remained despite the moderate tone of leaders who ousted President Bashar al-Assad a week ago. The head of the Syrian National Coalition, Hadi al-Bahra, has called for Syrians to unite behind a shared vision for the country's recovery. Al-Bahra urged national support for the caretaker government until a transitional body is established in March 2025. He outlined a roadmap for political transition, calling for a credible, inclusive government that avoids sectarianism and excludes no political factions. The UN's envoy for Syria, Geir Pedersen, has called for free and fair elections and humanitarian assistance for Syria. Addressing reporters in Damascus, Pedersen expressed hope for a political solution in the northeast after al-Assad was ousted this month.
Key in ensuring Syria receives the economic support it needs. There is clear international willingness to engage.
Damascus International Airport has reopened for the first time since Syria's President Bashar al-Assad was ousted by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. The first domestic flight departed from Damascus International Airport bound for Aleppo. The opening came as the UN's envoy told the Security Council that the country needs to receive the economic support it needs. According to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, Israeli forces have advanced 9 kilometers deep into the countryside of Daraa in southern Syria. The observatory said Israeli forces entered the village of Kouya and the Wahda Dam near the Syrian-Jordanian border and are stationed in strategic locations. They have warned residents to surrender weapons. It also reported that Israeli forces entered Battalion 74 near Saida on the border between the provinces of Qantara and Daraa, marking a new incursion into southern Syria. Syria's main seaport in the coastal city of Latakia has returned to work after rebuilding following Israeli airstrikes. At one end of the port, workers repaired a ship while trucks picked up containers at the other. The Syrian Navy section was hit by Israeli airstrikes last week, with several destroyed vessels still half submerged. Syrians have lined up outside banks in Damascus, attempting to access their money. Public sector employees who queued in front of ATM machines said they couldn't withdraw their salaries that have been withheld in banks since Bashar al-Assad was ousted as president. Syria's new government says it will raise wages and prioritize improving services. Moving to Russia, the Kremlin has stated that Russian intelligence services know who ordered the killing of top Russian General Igor Kurylov. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said Ukraine is using the methods of terrorists. Lieutenant General Kurylov, who was the chief of Russia's nuclear, biological, and chemical protection troops, was killed in Moscow on Tuesday. Russia's foreign ministry says that Ukraine repeatedly dropped white phosphorus munitions from drones in September. Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova said law enforcement agencies had evidence of the use of such munitions by Ukraine, but she did not provide details of the evidence. That brings us to the end of our news bulletin. Here's what we've been covering. Israeli occupation vehicles target Kamal Adwan Hospital in northern Gaza, causing a fire inside its intensive care unit. Egypt's El-Sisi and Indonesia's Widodo discuss developments in Gaza, Syria, and Lebanon. And Prime Minister Netanyahu says Israeli forces will stay in a buffer zone on the Syrian border. This concludes our news bulletin for the hour. Don't forget to follow Q News on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at QNewsEG to stay informed. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for more updates on Q News.